They say wisdom comes with age, but that's not always true. Just because someone grows older doesn't mean they grow wiser. In fact, some people do the opposite. They become more stubborn, more ignorant, and more resistant to change. It's easy to blame youth for foolishness, but the truth is, stupidity doesn't have an expiration date. Some people carry it with them all the way to their final days. And that's exactly what we're talking about today, how to recognize when old age hasn't brought wisdom, but foolishness instead. If you're wondering whether you're growing wiser or just getting older, keep watching. Because the last thing anyone wants is to spend their final years as a fool without even realizing it. Before we get further, I'd like to know where you're joining us from, and if you get any value from these videos, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. Not for the numbers, but because wisdom should be shared. Now, let's get into it. One of the first signs of a foolish person in old age is their refusal to listen. They don't just have opinions, they believe their opinions are the absolute truth. There's no room for discussion, no willingness to consider new ideas. If someone tells them something they don't want to hear, they dismiss it outright. I've been around long enough to know better, they say, but knowing better and refusing to learn are two very different things. The smartest people in old age are the ones who never stop learning. They stay curious, they ask questions, they listen more than they speak. A foolish person, on the other hand, believes they already know everything they need to know. If you try to correct them, they take offense. If you share new information, they wave it away. In their mind, the world should fit into their understanding, not the other way around. This kind of mindset is dangerous, not just for them, but for the people around them. Imagine being someone's child, trying to explain why the world isn't the same as it was 40 years ago, only to be met with a shrug and a dismissive laugh. Back in my day, they'll start, as if the past is the only era that matters. A wise person acknowledges that times change, and they adapt. A fool? They dig their heels in and insist the world should remain exactly as they remember it. Now, you might be wondering, what makes a person this way? Is it arrogance? Fear? Habit? The truth is, it's a little bit of everything. Some people fear change because it makes them feel powerless. Others have spent so many years being wrong that admitting it now feels unbearable. And for some, it's just sheer laziness. Learning takes effort, and they'd rather coast through life believing they already have it all figured out. But refusing to listen is only the first sign. There are others just as damaging, just as frustrating. Another sign of a foolish person in old age is their habit of blaming everyone else for their problems. They never take responsibility. If something goes wrong, it's always because of the government, the younger generation, bad luck, any excuse they can find. They've spent a lifetime avoiding accountability, and now, in their final years, it's become second nature. It's always someone else's fault. Their failed relationships. I was always too nice, people took advantage of me. Their financial troubles, the system is rigged. Their health problems? Doctors don't know anything these days. A wise person understands that life is a mix of personal choices and external factors. A fool, however, sees themselves as a victim, even when they're the ones who made the choices that led them to where they are. Now, don't get me wrong, some things in life really aren't our fault. But if someone has spent 60, 70, or 80 years blaming others for every single failure, what does that tell you? It tells you they never learned, they never reflected, they never stopped to ask, what could I have done differently? And that's a tragedy. Because self-reflection is one of the greatest tools for wisdom, and yet some people reach old age without ever using it. And here's where it gets even worse. Not only do they refuse to take responsibility, but they also refuse to see their own contradictions. They'll spend years criticizing others, pointing out their mistakes, acting as if they have all the answers. But the moment someone turns that same scrutiny on them, they get defensive. They lash out. They refuse to hear it. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe it was a relative, a neighbor, or an old friend. They have no problem telling others what to do, but the second someone suggests they might be wrong, they get angry. Why? Because deep down, they've built their whole identity on the idea that they're right, and admitting otherwise would mean questioning everything they've ever believed about themselves. A wise person knows they're not perfect. They embrace feedback, they welcome correction, they see it as a chance to grow. But a foolish person sees any challenge to their beliefs as an attack. And as a result, they push people away. They create distance between themselves and those who actually care about them. Because let's be honest, who wants to spend time around someone who always blames others, never admits fault, and refuses to listen? So, we've covered two big signs of a foolish person in old age: refusing to listen and always blaming others. But there's more. In fact, there are 7 signs in total, and we're just getting started. We've already talked about 2 signs of foolishness in old age: refusing to listen and always blaming others. But there's another sign that's just as damaging, maybe even worse. It's something that slowly eats away at relationships, turns people bitter, and leaves them lonely in their final years. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize they're doing it. I'm talking about holding on to grudges. A foolish person in old age carries resentment like a heavy sack on their back. They hold on to old arguments, past betrayals, and things that should have been let go years ago. They remember every slight, every disagreement, every moment someone hurt them, and instead of moving on, they let it fester. They tell the same bitter stories over and over, reliving the pain as if it just happened yesterday. And you know what happens when you live like that? You push people away. Because here's the thing, wise people understand that life is too short to hold on to resentment. They know that people make mistakes, that misunderstandings happen, and that sometimes you have to let go for your own peace of mind. But a fool? A fool clings to the past like a drowning man clings to a rock, refusing to see that it's only pulling them under. And here's the irony. Most of the time, the person they're angry at has already moved on. They've forgotten the argument. They've let go of the grudge. They're living their life, while the foolish person is still sitting in the same anger, the same resentment, replaying the same old stories in their head. You ever met an old person who spends half their time talking about what someone did to them 30 years ago? A neighbor who borrowed money and never paid it back? A family member who made a rude comment at a wedding? A boss who overlooked them for a promotion, and they bring it up like it just happened yesterday. What they don't realize is that their anger isn't hurting anyone but themselves. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. But in reality, they're the only ones being poisoned. And the saddest part? People get tired of hearing it. At first they listen out of politeness, but after a while they start avoiding the conversation. Then they start avoiding the person altogether. Because nobody wants to be around someone who's stuck in the past, bringing up the same grudges over and over again. That's how fools in old age end up alone, not because people don't care about them, but because people get exhausted by their bitterness. And that brings us to the 4th sign of foolishness in old age: being negative about everything. You ever notice how some older people seem to radiate wisdom and warmth, while others just seem bitter and miserable? That's not an accident. It's a choice. A wise person understands that every stage of life has its challenges, but they don't dwell on them. They find joy in the little things. They laugh. They appreciate what they have. But a fool finds something to complain about in every situation. If the weather is nice, they say it'll probably rain tomorrow. If they hear good news, they immediately start worrying about what could go wrong. If someone succeeds, they say it must have been luck. If someone fails, they say, "I told you so." No matter what happens, they always have something negative to say. And after a while, people stop listening because negativity is draining. It sucks the life out of a conversation. It makes everything feel heavier than it needs to be. And here's the real tragedy. Many of these people don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're just being realistic. They think they're just telling it like it is. But what they don't understand is that their constant negativity is driving people away. Nobody wants to spend their time around someone who makes everything feel worse. And it's not just about how it affects others, it's about how it affects them. Studies have shown that people who are constantly negative live shorter, less fulfilling lives. Why? Because stress, bitterness, and resentment take a physical toll. The body suffers when the mind is constantly focused on what's wrong. Meanwhile, wise people, people who choose to be grateful, to find joy, to appreciate what they have, live longer, happier lives. Not because their lives are easier, but because they've made a choice. A choice not to let negativity control them. So let's take a step back. We've now covered 4 signs of foolishness in old age: refusing to listen, always blaming others, holding on to grudges, being negative about everything, and the pattern is clear. Foolish people in old age don't just suffer because of bad luck. They suffer because of how they think. They refuse to grow. They refuse to let go. They refuse to see things in a different way. And because of that, they miss out on what could be some of the best years of their life. Because here's the truth. Old age doesn't have to be miserable. Aging can be a time of reflection, of wisdom, of deep and meaningful relationships. But only if a person is willing to let go of the things that hold them back. We've already gone through 4 signs of foolishness in old age: refusing to listen, always blaming others, holding on to grudges, and being negative about everything. These traits don't just make a person unpleasant to be around, they shape the way they experience the world. A foolish person in their later years doesn't just suffer because of outside circumstances. They suffer because of their own mindset, their own habits, and the way they respond to life. But there's another sign of foolishness that might be the most destructive of all. It doesn't just ruin the present, it damages relationships, pushes family away, and leaves a person alone in their final years. I'm talking about trying to control everything and everyone. A foolish person in old age believes they have the right to dictate how other people should live their lives. They interfere in their children's decisions, criticize their grandchildren's choices, and expect the world to operate by their rules. They see life as a game where they should still be the one calling the shots, even when it's no longer their turn. They say things like, "You should listen to me, I know better. That's not how we used to do it. I'm your elder, you owe me respect." And here's where they go wrong. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. The people who are truly respected in old age aren't the ones who force their opinions onto others. They're the ones who lead by example, who offer wisdom without expecting control, who understand that life moves forward, and that younger generations have the right to make their own mistakes. A foolish person doesn't see it that way. They see their family as extensions of themselves. They take it personally when their children don't live exactly how they wanted them to. They believe their way is the only way, and when people don't listen, they react with anger, resentment, or guilt-tripping. And what happens? People pull away. Children stop calling as often. Grandchildren visit less. Family members start keeping their distance, not because they don't love them, but because they're tired of feeling controlled. And here's the saddest part. The foolish person doesn't see the connection. They don't realize that their need to control is the very thing that's pushing people away. Instead, they blame their family. They don't care about me. They're ungrateful. This generation has no respect. But in reality, respect goes both ways. You can't force it. You can't demand it. You have to show it if you expect to receive it. And that brings us to the next sign of foolishness in old age: refusing to apologize. A wise person understands that being older doesn't mean being above mistakes. They know that sometimes they've hurt people, even unintentionally. And when they realize they've done something wrong, they own up to it. A foolish person? They never apologize. Why? Because in their mind, they're never wrong. Or worse, they believe that because they're older, they shouldn't have to say sorry. That younger people should just accept their behavior, no matter how hurtful it is. They'll say things like, "Oh, that's just how I am. You should respect your elders. You're too sensitive." But here's the truth. Refusing to apologize doesn't make you strong. It makes you weak. It means you're too afraid to face your own flaws, too stubborn to admit when you've hurt someone, too set in your ways to grow. And here's what they don't realize. Apologizing doesn't make you lose respect. It makes people respect you more. It shows strength, humility, and wisdom. It shows that even in old age, you're willing to learn, to improve, to be better. But a foolish person? They would rather lose relationships than admit fault. They would rather let years of silence grow between them and their loved ones than simply say, "I was wrong, I'm sorry." And because of that, they push people away, not because they have to, not because life is unfair, but because of their own pride. And now we come to the seventh and final sign, the one that can make or break a person's final years. Living without purpose. A foolish person in old age believes that once they've retired, once their children have grown, once they've reached a certain point in life, there's nothing left to do. They stop learning. They stop growing. They stop contributing. They wake up every day and just exist. They sit in front of the television for hours. They complain about how bored they are. They say, "What's the point?" as if life is already over. And that's the most dangerous mindset of all. Because life isn't over until it's over. The people who stay sharp, who stay fulfilled, who live their final years with wisdom, are the ones who find purpose no matter what stage of life they're in. They keep learning. They keep helping others. They keep finding ways to contribute, even if it's something small. A foolish person gives up. A wise person keeps going. So now, we've covered all 7 signs of foolishness in old age. And at this point, there's a question we all have to ask ourselves. Are we growing wiser as we age, or just growing older? Because wisdom isn't automatic. It doesn't come just because we've lived a certain number of years. It comes from choices. The choice to listen. The choice to take responsibility. The choice to let go of grudges. The choice to be positive. The choice to respect others. The choice to apologize. And the choice to keep living with purpose. We've talked about the 7 signs of foolishness in old age, the habits, the mindsets, and the behaviors that turn what should be the most peaceful and fulfilling years of life into a time of regret, bitterness, and isolation. And now we come to the most important question of all. How do we avoid these traps? Because here's the thing, nobody wants to become that bitter, stubborn, lonely old person. But it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens slowly, over decades, through small choices and unnoticed patterns. And by the time most people realize it, it's already too late. But it doesn't have to be that way. Because wisdom, true wisdom, is not just about knowing what's wrong. It's about choosing what's right. So let's talk about what it actually means to age wisely. How to make sure that when we grow old, we do so with dignity, with grace, and with a sense of purpose. The first and most powerful step? Never stop learning. Foolish people in old age believe they already know everything. Wise people? They remain students of life until their very last breath. They read, they asked questions. They listened to younger people instead of dismissing them. They understand that just because the world changes doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means there's more to learn. And here's the beauty of it. The more you learn, the sharper you stay. The mind is a muscle. If you don't use it, it weakens. But if you keep challenging it, stretching it, feeding it, your wisdom only grows with time. And that brings us to the second key to aging wisely. Let go of what doesn't serve you. That means letting go of grudges, letting go of the past, letting go of the idea that things have to be the way they were 50 years ago. A wise person understands that holding on to anger only hurts them. They know that forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay, it's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying it. And when you do that, you don't just make your own life better, you make yourself easier to be around. People enjoy your presence, they seek your company, they feel at peace when they're with you. And that leads us to the third rule of wisdom in old age. Be someone people actually want to be around. That means being positive instead of negative. That means encouraging others instead of always pointing out what's wrong. That means respecting younger generations instead of constantly criticizing them. Because here's a hard truth. Nobody has to spend time with you. Your children, your grandchildren, they don't owe you visits. They don't owe you their time. The people who have strong, loving relationships in old age are the ones who invested in those relationships. They were kind. They were supportive. They gave advice when it was needed, but they didn't try to control. They made their presence feel like a gift, not an obligation. And speaking of relationships, that brings us to the fourth key. Be willing to say, "I'm sorry." Pride ruins more families than anything else. And the older you get, the more damage it can do. Because at some point, time runs out. And the regret of never saying, "I'm sorry," lasts far longer than whatever argument made you refuse to say it. A wise person values peace over ego. They understand that being right is never as important as being kind. And that takes us to the fifth key. Stop trying to control others. Let your children make their own choices. Let your grandchildren live in a different world than you grew up in. Let people be who they are. Because control pushes people away. If you want a strong family, if you want relationships that last, if you want people to want to be around you, support, don't control. Offer wisdom, don't impose your will. Because at the end of the day, every person has the right to live their own life. And when you finally accept that, you'll feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Peace. But peace isn't just about relationships. It's also about how you see yourself. And that's why the sixth key to aging wisely is this: have a purpose. A foolish person believes their life is over once they retire, once their children grow up, once they reach a certain age. A wise person understands that life only ends when you stop living it. Find something meaningful to do. It doesn't have to be big. It could be mentoring, volunteering, creating, learning a new skill, helping others, sharing your experiences in a way that benefits people. Because without purpose, the days start blending together. The boredom sets in, the negativity grows, the foolishness creeps in. But when you have something to look forward to, life stays exciting. You wake up with a reason to keep going. And that's what separates wise people in old age from the ones who waste their final years in bitterness and regret. They keep living. So now, let's take a step back. We started this conversation by asking, how do people end up foolish in old age? And now we have our answer. It happens to people who stop learning, who refuse to let go of the past, who push people away with negativity, who control instead of guide, who hold on to grudges instead of embracing forgiveness, who let their pride ruin relationships, who stop living with purpose. And the saddest part, most of them never realize it. They reach the end of their life believing they were always right, when in reality, they lost everything that truly mattered. But that doesn't have to be you, because wisdom isn't about age, it's about choice. You can choose to be someone people want to be around. You can choose to be open-minded. You can choose to be positive, to be kind, to be someone whose presence is a gift, not a burden. And when you do that, old age doesn't have to be something to fear. It becomes something to embrace. So the final question I'll leave you with is this: are you just getting older? Or are you actually growing wiser? Because the answer isn't decided by time. It's decided by you